Why don't Democrats want Americans to know the truth about the origins of COVID? Why did they just block a GOP bill that would have required the Director of National Intelligence to declassify information related to the U.S. government's investigations into the Wuhan coronavirus pandemic? And most especially, here's a question: what role did the Wuhan Institute of Virology play in the outbreak? For that matter, while we're on the subject, why won't Nancy Pelosi put a single Republican other than Liz Cheney on her 9/11 style commission into the January 6th storming of the Capitol building? I'll tell you why. Because Democrats right now, for whatever reason, do not care about truth. And this has massive implications for our country, for our economy, which, by the way, is totally struggling in light of Joe Biden's inflationary policies. One grocery store CEO now saying that food prices are going to be 10 to 14% higher by next year on grocery store shelves. How is that helping anyone? Temporary you-know-what. Look, we have a lot to get to today on this edition of the Trish Regan Show. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Trish, of course, and you're just not going to believe what the Democrats are trying to do on this COVID intelligence bill. I have that coming up. But first, a very quick word from one of our sponsors. I'm very glad about this particular sponsorship because this is something that's actually really important to me, and it gives me a chance to get a little bit on my soapbox, so to speak, in terms of personal financial responsibility, which is so critical and so important. I mean, especially if you have a family, right? Which I do. I'll tell you, I remember when I was a kid, there was a family that lived in town whose father died unexpectedly of a heart attack, age 40. The kids were still really young, and it was awful. It was awful because obviously the whole family was going through a lot. They lost their father. The wife lost her husband. But you think about just the trauma of that. They were also going through a lot of trauma financially because it turns out that this father, 40 years old, didn't have life insurance. And I just remember this affecting me as a kid. I remember hearing he didn't have life insurance. And I thought, wow, that's one thing you always want to make sure you have. And I'm going to tell you, it is something you always want to make sure you have, especially if you have loved ones that depend on you. I mean, this is a non-starter. You just got to have it. It's the right thing to do. I wish in school that they would teach real home economics. I mean, I love the chocolate chip cookies and everything, don't get me wrong, and kids love that. But wouldn't it be nice if they actually taught home economics and you learned about what went into running a household? Because one of those things would be if you have people that are dependent on you, a significant other or kids, you need life insurance. Top of the list. And so that's my speech. I feel very strongly about it. And so I'm happy to tell you about SelectQuote, which I recommend. SelectQuote has been around for over 35 years, has over 2 million families that have trusted SelectQuote to find them life insurance. The company SelectQuote actually shops around with the highly rated insurance companies like Prudential, Banner Life, Mutual of Omaha, and plenty of others to find you the very best rates. And their technology basically matches your individual needs with the business insurance or the best insurance from the business to get you the best policy. And you'd be surprised, actually. They're very affordable. You can find a very affordable policy, and you should. The quotes are free, so don't put this off. Go to selectquote.com, and within minutes, you'll have your free quote. That website is selectquote.com, selectquote.com. They shop, you save, and look, bottom line is, I'm just going to say it, you need insurance. Anyway, back to what's going on here. The craziness, talking about lack of personal responsibility, right? That's what you're seeing right now from these Democrats on Capitol Hill. They don't care. They don't care what any of this seems to mean to future generations. And for some reason, they want to just close the door on Wuhan and China. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. It was the COVID-19 origin. That was the bill. COVID-19 origin. And the bill first established that we would identify the precise origins of COVID-19 because it's critical for preventing a similar pandemic in the future. Don't you think? Don't you think, right? Don't forget, if you asked about this just a couple of months ago, you were branded a total conspiracy theorist. Google would take you down. Facebook would shut you down. Twitter would be like, that's it, over. I guess because Donald Trump had said he saw some intelligence that led him to believe it might have come out of Wuhan. Therefore, if you agree with Trump, oh boy, we're going to get to that, by the way, because the January 6th thing we got to get to. Anyway, we are still learning about this Wuhan thing. We have leaked intelligence that came out rather recently, first reported in the Wall Street Journal in late May. By the way, I had heard this. I had heard this from sources all along, going all the way back to February of 2020. Anyway, this was reported in May that 3 people at the Wuhan lab became sick. They were hospitalized with symptoms of COVID back in November 2019. So my question is, why not declassify what we know about the Wuhan lab and Beijing's attempts to cover up the origin of this pandemic? Why not do that, right? And by the way, why is it taking so long to get any information that we need on this? Why is Fauci still insisting that the National Institute of Health never, ever provided any kind of funding for gain-of-function research in Wuhan, when, by the way, his boss, Dr. Francis Collins, his direct boss, said we did? You know, there's a lot to figure out here. We've got effectively receipts that show U.S. taxpayer dollars going to EcoHealth, which then in turn gave it to the Wuhan Institute of Virology for back coronavirus research. This is not okay. We cannot sweep this under the rug, okay? We need answers, and it's up to us to keep pounding the table so that we get them, because the Democrats don't want to declassify any of this. I ask why, right? Why? I mean, that's a bit of a puzzle. It's possible that they fear if we find out to the extent of China's role in all this, then maybe it could ignite some kind of World War III. I mean, there was talk of that, right? Because don't forget, there were people within the State Department that wanted this investigation shut down when then President Trump had already launched it, right? And that's, by the way, what Biden did. As soon as he came into office, he shut down the investigation. It wasn't until this intel came out about the 3 people at the Wuhan lab having symptoms of COVID that we actually restarted the investigation. So for some reason, there's this feeling among some of those in the deep state that it would be very problematic. Okay, look, I don't want World War III. I don't want to be at war with China, but I do want to know what's what, don't you? And then I guess the other fear is just exactly what role did the U.S. play in some of this not so savory research, right? I guess they want that to stay classified because we know about the $600,000 that went to Wuhan, and yet people are still trying to say, oh, that didn't really happen. Yet, like I said, we've seen receipts, and Rand Paul is all over this. Senator Rand Paul is demanding the truth. We need the truth, okay? And you know what? Until the truth comes out, you're going to get a whole lot of speculation, and that's never good. So just do us that service of declassifying what can be declassified here, so that we know what really went down. Meanwhile, speaking of a lack of concern or desire to get at the truth, think about what's happening right now in terms of the January 6th committee that Nancy Pelosi has put together. I mean, it really feels as though it's going to be a total, utter sham because she's rejecting any Republicans that might have had any sympathy for Donald Trump. I mean, Congressman Jim Jordan, Representative Jim Banks, both trying to be on her House Intel committee investigation into January 6th because they're concerned about the probe's integrity, which I think is pretty fair. I mean, this move is completely unprecedented for her to say she doesn't want any Republicans. Oh, except Liz Cheney, who maybe doesn't entirely count as a Republican these days. Anyway, so they're saying we're concerned about the integrity. This is unprecedented. And she says it may be unprecedented, but I just don't care. Here we go. Here's the quote. The unprecedented nature of January 6th demands this unprecedented decision. That's Nancy Pelosi. Well, Kevin McCarthy's firing back saying, you know what, this represents an egregious abuse of power. And he's right. I mean, if you're trying to figure out what actually happened, then shouldn't you want to be as inclusive as you can and actually get to the bottom of everything? Don't you want to be as transparent as possible? Don't you have questions about the lack of security there? Why was that? Wouldn't you want some Republicans on there too? Just saying, right? Because when you try and shut down one side, what ultimately it does, and we're talking about half the country here, half the country voted for Donald Trump. When you try and excommunicate people like that, it leaves people incredibly suspicious of our government. And we don't want that to be our government's reputation, do we? We want Americans to trust their government, which means the government needs to trust them, right? Two-way street, works both ways. And yet we have a situation where you have some Democrats that are trying to politicize this so much, they will use this as an opportunity from now to forever to get rid of the other side. The other side that are somehow conspiracy theorists for thinking maybe the Wuhan virus that had the Wuhan Institute of Virology right next door, where they were studying these viruses, maybe it might have come out of there. That's conspiracy theory talk, right? Look, I just think, I've said it before, I'm going to say it again, the truth is very messy sometimes to get to. But if you're not open to all sides, how do you have any shot, any chance in actually getting it? You know, the one thing I want to leave you with today, though, is to just think about the inflation that we're dealing with right now in society, just off the charts. Joe Biden wants you to believe that inflation is under control. He did this big town hall on CNN, said, oh, it's no big deal. We got it totally under control. It's manageable. That's what all the experts think. Look, 5.4% increase in consumer prices. That's what we saw in the latest data set. That hasn't been seen in 13 years. So don't sit there and tell me it's all just supply chain stuff like AOC is doing. I mean, this woman doesn't even know the definition of capitalism, and she's out there trying to say, oh, it's all under control. It's just supply. Look, I'm here to tell you, and you can listen to my many podcasts on this, on Biden's inflation and inflation skyrocketing. I have been pounding the table on this actually since last summer when we got the second COVID stimulus, because I was worried about this exact scenario. And then you couple that together with his extraordinary spending and the Federal Reserve's extraordinary money printing. And I'll tell you what you get. You get inflation. It's not under control. Not under control at all. Consumer prices are skyrocketing, again, up the most in 13 years, according to the latest report. And John Catsimatidis, he's the CEO of a big grocery store chain in New York called Gristades. He just came out and said, you know what? I wouldn't be surprised to see prices up 14% on grocery store shelves next year. You got a series of companies, Whirlpool, Kimberly-Clark, Procter & Gamble. They're all telling us they're raising prices. They have to. Okay, so the train has left the station. Prices are going up. And the more Joe Biden talks about handing out checks, and that's a big issue. I mean, they're talking about possibly shutting down the country again in some way, shape, or form. I mean, the National Teachers Union, the NEA, they don't want to go back to school in the fall until every child has been vaccinated. And we don't even have a vaccine for children just yet. Let's be clear. So this is basically them, the union, holding up the entire American economy, because they want more vaccines for kids, which, well, who can't get it yet. So none of it makes any sense, but this is the world in which we are now dealing. And I can tell you that inflation, ask Paul Volcker this, right, from the 1970s, it's very hard to control. And you know why this is bad for you? It means that all the money that you've saved, it's eroding. The value of that is totally eroding. When prices go up, it means your purchasing power goes down. So this acts as a heavy tax on everyone. Oh, and by the way, he wants to raise taxes too. So this is just like a recipe for total economic disaster. I want you to go to trishintel.com, sign up for my newsletter right there. Make sure that you download this podcast, that you subscribe to this channel, because we have a lot to discuss and we're going to keep on discussing it. So I will see you right back here again tomorrow. Thanks so much for listening, everyone.